Jamal Carter walked into class with his homework neatly done, every answer perfect. But instead of praise, his teacher ripped the paper in half and said, "Kids like you will never be more than average." The class laughed. Jamal stayed silent. What no one knew in his backpack was a secret that could expose them all and change everything. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The chalk screeched against the blackboard, its sharp sound cutting through the chatter of 30 restless high school students. The fluorescent lights above flickered faintly, buzzing in the silence that followed. Mr. Richard Callahan, a tall white man in his early 50s with thinning gray hair and a stern jawline, stood at the front of the room. His pressed shirt sleeves rolled up just enough to reveal veins that pulsed with quiet irritation. "Class," he said, raising his voice with the authority of someone used to commanding attention. "Today we'll test how well you've been paying attention. No calculators, no shortcuts, just your brain." The words landed heavily, but most of the students didn't take him seriously. They shifted in their seats, some already doodling in their notebooks, others glancing at the clock above the door. In the second row, pressed close to the wall as if trying to disappear into it, sat Jamal Carter, 17 years old, lean and quiet. He kept his head bent low, his pencil tapping gently against the corner of his notebook. His dark brown skin glowed softly under the harsh lights, and his eyes, deep, steady, endlessly curious, were hidden beneath lowered lashes. He had learned long ago that silence drew less trouble. Mr. Callahan's eyes flickered across the room, searching for a target. His gaze stopped at Jamal, and his lips curved into something between a sneer and a smirk. Well, the teacher said, tapping the chalk against his palm. "Maybe today we'll give Mr. Carter a chance to show us he's awake. What do you think, class?" A few students snickered. Jamal didn't look up. He had heard this tone before, the kind that sounded like an invitation but carried a hidden trap. His stomach tightened. "Jamal," Mr. Callahan continued, "you've been sitting there for weeks now, quiet as a shadow. Tell me, are you learning anything, or are you just enjoying the view out the window?" The classroom erupted in soft laughter, some forced, some genuine. Jamal's ears burned, but he kept his eyes on his notebook. He wanted to vanish, to let the moment pass. "Come on, Jamal," Callahan pressed. "Say something. Or can't you?" The laughter grew louder, and Jamal felt it crawl over his skin like ants. He knew this game. The teacher didn't want an answer. He wanted an example. Someone to hold up as proof of laziness. Jamal's silence only fueled the fire. Inside his mind, however, numbers flowed with ease. Equations and solutions twisted and turned like rivers. Every step logical, precise, and almost musical. Jamal didn't need to prove to himself that he understood math. He had been solving problems far beyond the textbook level since he was 13. But he also knew that no one in this classroom, least of all Mr. Callahan, expected that from him. "See, class?" Callahan's voice rose, pulling attention back to him. "This is what happens when you don't engage. You end up like Carter here. Blank, lost, wasting everyone's time." The sting of his words sliced through the air. A few students looked at Jamal with pity, but more with relief that it wasn't them. No one spoke up. Jamal's hand tightened around his pencil. He felt the weight of his silence pressing against his chest, but he said nothing. His survival depended on it. Callahan turned back to the board and scribbled a long equation, the chalk clicking with each stroke. 4 by 2 pawns 3 by 7. 0 4 by 2. He spun around, facing Jamal again, chalk dust floating in the air between them, like sparks. "Since you're so quiet, Carter," Callahan said with exaggerated patience, "why don't you solve this for us? Show the class you're not just here to warm a seat." The equation was nothing to Jamal. He had already worked through it in his mind before the chalk had stopped moving. The quadratic formula came naturally, the solution unfolding effortlessly, but the memory of laughter, of sneers, of teachers past who had dismissed his quick answers as luck or cheating, held him frozen. Callahan crossed his arms. "Well, don't just sit there. Or is it too much?" Jamal's throat tightened. He wanted to stand, to walk to the board, to show every last one of them how quickly he could solve it. But another thought crept in. If he did, Callahan would find a way to dismiss it, to make him smaller again. The humiliation would double. He stared at his notebook instead, pencil tracing invisible lines on the paper. "Exactly what I thought," Callahan said sharply. "Nothing." He turned to the class. "Let this be a lesson. If you don't try, If you don't participate, you'll end up like this. Silent, clueless, wasting potential. The words hung in the air, heavy and unfair. Jamal felt the sting not only for himself, but for every time someone like him had been called lazy, unmotivated, or incapable, simply for not fitting into the mold the teacher expected. A boy in the back whispered, "Told you he was dumb," and a ripple of laughter followed. Jamal clenched his jaw, his chest burning, but inside his mind was already miles ahead, solving, reducing, simplifying until the numbers resolved into their final truth. The answer was clear, sharp, undeniable. He wrote it quickly, quietly, in the corner of his notebook, where no one could see. X fry 3 fran 3 2 4 fry 3 fry 3 fry X menu 3 first to whack X3 we spring duety X1 or X148 X1 or 74X. He exhaled softly. Correct. Precise. But Moving on, Callahan said, wiping the board, erasing the problem before Jamal had the chance to raise his hand. His voice was casual, dismissive. Some people just aren't cut out for this subject. The dismissal landed like a stone in Jamal's chest. But then something shifted. At the edge of the room, near the windows, Emily Sanders, a new student with auburn hair and sharp green eyes, leaned slightly forward. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't smirking. She was watching Jamal, her gaze fixed on the faint movements of his pencil across his notebook. She caught the numbers, the way his hand moved with certainty. She saw something no one else cared to notice. Jamal didn't see her watching. He only felt the weight of the teacher's words pressing against him, heavier than the backpack at his feet. He wanted to scream that he wasn't lazy, that he wasn't slow, that the only reason he stayed quiet was because silence hurt less than humiliation. But before he could even process the moment, Mr. Callahan turned back to the board, eyes gleaming with something almost cruel. He picked up the chalk again and began scrawling a new problem, this one longer, more complex, designed not for teaching but for breaking. The chalk dust fell in little clouds as the numbers stretched across the board, twisting into something even the stronger students knew would take real effort. When he finished, Callahan stepped aside, gesturing toward Jamal with an exaggerated flourish. "All right then," he said, his smirk returning. "Carter, since you didn't like the warm-up, let's see how you handle this one. Go ahead, show us all what you can do." The room went silent. Every eye turned toward Jamal. His heart pounded in his ears. He could feel the trap closing, the teacher's smirk daring him to fail. And yet, beneath the weight of the stares, something inside Jamal stirred. The quiet hum of numbers, the unshakable rhythm of logic. He lifted his eyes, finally meeting Callahan's gaze. The teacher smirked wider, convinced this would be the moment Jamal broke. Jamal slowly closed his notebook, pushed his chair back, and began to rise, the impossible problem still glowing on the board like a dare no one else could touch. Jamal stood slowly, the screech of his chair against the tiled floor slicing through the tense silence. Every head turned. Some students leaned forward in their desks, eager to see him stumble, while others smirked as though the humiliation had already begun. Mr. Callahan's eyes glinted with quiet satisfaction, his arms crossed as though the verdict was already written. The long equation stretched across the blackboard like a wall meant to keep Jamal out. It was layered with variables, fractions and exponents that tangled together in a way that made even the sharpest students squirm in their seats. Callahan hadn't chosen it to teach. It was meant to prove his point. Jamal didn't move toward the board. Instead, he sank back into his seat, opened his notebook, and began to write. His pencil slid across the page, fast but steady, like a hand trained through years of quiet practice. The class shifted restlessly. A boy in the back muttered under his breath, "He's not even trying, just scribbling nonsense." A ripple of laughter followed. But Jamal didn't lift his head. Inside, he wasn't thinking about them. His mind was alive, numbers cascading like water, each step unlocking the next with graceful inevitability. He barely heard the noise of the classroom anymore. It was replaced by the hum of certainty. Quadratics, factorization, simplification. He dismantled the problem layer by layer, seeing its structure as clearly as if it were a building made of glass. Where others saw walls, he saw doors. Where they saw chaos, he saw patterns. The sound of his pencil quickened, tapping rhythmically, as he filled line after line. His breathing slowed, controlled, as though solving this problem was the only safe place left for him. Then he stopped. He looked down at his answer, clean, precise, and correct. He read through each step twice, ensuring nothing slipped. It hadn't. His answer was flawless. He raised his head slightly, just enough to glimpse the board again. The teacher's equation still loomed, untouched by any other hand. Jamal knew that if he stood up now, if he walked to the board and wrote what he had, he would silence every laugh in the room. He would prove them all wrong. But he hesitated. He could already feel Callahan's voice in his head. The sneering dismissal, the denial, lucky guess. Copied it from somewhere. No way you solved that yourself. He had been here before, in other classes with other teachers who mistook quiet brilliance for ignorance. Before Jamal could move, Emily Sanders noticed. She sat in the third row, a few desks away, her notebook untouched. Her green eyes were fixed, not on the board, but on Jamal's page. She had caught the way his pencil moved. Fast, deliberate, confident. She leaned forward, straining to see, and her eyes widened when she realized he had solved it. Meanwhile, Mr. Callahan tapped his chalk against the board impatiently. Well, Carter, any day now. Or are you still trying to remember which number comes after 3? The class erupted in cruel laughter. Jamal's chest tightened, but he said nothing. His notebook lay open on his desk, the answer glowing in graphite, hidden in plain sight. Emily's eyes darted between Jamal's notebook and the board. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't smirking. She was stunned. Jamal finally lifted his gaze and locked eyes with the teacher. For the first time all class, he spoke. His voice was low but steady, cutting through the noise. It's 1 and -7/4. The laughter stopped abruptly. A hush fell over the room. Students turned, exchanging glances, uncertain if they had heard correctly. Callahan blinked, his smirk faltering for the briefest moment before hardening again. Excuse me? Jamal repeated, louder this time. The solutions are 1 and -7/4. A boy in the back whispered, That's actually right. Murmurs rippled through the classroom, a wave of disbelief mixed with awe. Emily sat straighter, her lips parting slightly in surprise. She knew it wasn't luck. She had seen the process unfold in his notebook. Callahan's jaw tightened. He turned back to the board, reworking the steps in silence, chalk screeching as he retraced the problem. The room stayed quiet, every student waiting for the result. Finally, he stepped back. The answer matched Jamal's, perfectly. A collective gasp rippled through the class. Some students exchanged wide-eyed stares. Others leaned toward Jamal as though seeing him for the first time. But Callahan didn't acknowledge it. He tossed the chalk onto the ledge and gave a dismissive shrug. Beginner's luck, he said sharply. Even a broken clock is right twice a day. The laughter returned, smaller this time, but still enough to sting. Jamal felt his stomach twist. His triumph had been erased in seconds, rewritten as accident. His classmates laughed not at his mistake, but at the idea that his success wasn't real. Emily's brow furrowed. She glanced at Jamal, her eyes narrowing as if silently telling him, I know the truth. Jamal sat back, staring at the faint lines in his notebook. He felt the heat of humiliation creep up his neck again, stronger now because he had dared to speak. Callahan smoothed his shirt sleeves and continued. Let's move on. Those of you who actually study will have no problem with the next one. His tone lingered on the word study, a pointed jab meant to draw the line between who belonged and who didn't. Jamal's fists tightened under the desk. He knew what had just happened wasn't about math. It was about perception, about expectation, about being boxed into an image he could never escape. His quietness was mistaken for stupidity. His correctness was reframed as coincidence. Either way, he lost. Emily, though, didn't laugh. She kept her eyes on Jamal, her expression unreadable but intent. She had noticed the precision in his work, the confidence in his voice when he gave the solution. Something about him didn't fit the story the teacher was trying to tell. She wrote nothing in her own notebook. Instead, she quietly observed, her mind racing. As the class moved on, the injustice festered. Jamal's brilliance had been revealed for a fleeting moment, only to be swallowed by prejudice and mockery. But in that moment, something else had shifted, too. Someone had seen him. Someone who might not let it fade away. The bell finally rang, loud and jarring, signaling the end of class. Students rushed to gather their things, their voices rising in overlapping chatter. Some laughed about the incident, others shook their heads, but none gave it much more thought. For them it was just another classroom drama. But for Jamal, it was heavier than that. He slid his notebook into his backpack, careful not to let anyone glimpse the pages filled with his work. He had learned to guard his mind the way others guarded secrets. Mr. Callahan dismissed the students with a curt wave, not sparing Jamal a second glance. To him the boy had already been dismissed, filed away as irrelevant no matter what the numbers said. As the classroom emptied, Jamal lingered, moving slowly, shoulders slumped, trying to shrink into the background. But Emily stayed too. She gathered her books with deliberate slowness, her eyes flicking toward Jamal, every few seconds. She had seen what no one else had bothered to notice. She had seen his notebook, seen the exact steps that led to the answer. She knew it wasn't luck. Jamal zipped his backpack and glanced toward the door, ready to escape into the hallway before anyone else could corner him with whispers. That's when he caught Emily's eyes. She didn't look away. For a second it unsettled him. He wasn't used to anyone paying attention, not like this. But her gaze wasn't mocking. It was curious, maybe even impressed. Jamal dropped his eyes quickly, slipping past her toward the door. His steps were quick, almost desperate, as though he could outrun the weight of the classroom. Emily watched him go, a thought forming quietly in her mind. There was more to Jamal Carter than anyone realized. As Jamal disappeared into the hallway, Emily pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of the torn corner of his notebook page he had left behind. Numbers sprawled neatly across it, undeniable proof that he had solved the impossible. The days after that math class unfolded like a heavy curtain slowly being drawn, each one dimmer than the last. Jamal walked the same halls, sat in the same second-row seat, and kept his notebook close like a shield. He barely looked up during lessons, though the echo of his correct answer still lingered in some classmates' whispers. But if there had been a chance for recognition, Mr. Callahan was determined to erase it. Carter, the teacher barked the following Monday, his chalk already scrawling a messy equation across the board. Why don't you tell us the answer to this one? Let's see if lightning strikes twice. The class chuckled. Jamal's chest tightened. He hadn't volunteered. He hadn't even made eye contact. Yet Callahan seemed to scan the room each day until his eyes landed on him. Like a spotlight fixed on a target, Jamal did what he always did. He solved the problem quickly in his notebook, neat steps leading to a clean solution. And as always, he hesitated to raise his hand. Thought so, Callahan said when Jamal stayed quiet. Still nothing. Class, do you see what I mean? Some students coast by, hoping others will do the work for them. The laughter returned, more practiced this time, the room conditioned to follow Callahan's cues. It became routine. Nearly every day, Jamal was called upon. Sometimes with problems the class hadn't covered yet, other times with trick questions designed to stump him. No matter what he did, solve them or stay silent, Callahan found a way to spin it into a lesson about laziness or incompetence. At first Jamal's classmates found it funny, but slowly, some began to notice the pattern. He wasn't just being called at random. He was being targeted, yet none of them spoke up. After all, Callahan's authority was unquestioned, and most students were relieved to not be in Jamal's place. Even when Jamal did give correct answers, Callahan brushed them off. Lucky guess. Someone must have told you that. Don't think you can fool me. Jamal's confidence withered under the constant dismissals. His notebook filled with flawless solutions, but they stayed hidden, trapped between the lines of paper no one would ever see. Then came the grades. Jamal had studied relentlessly for a recent algebra test, reviewing formulas and working through practice problems late into the night. When the papers were returned, his stomach dropped. A bold red C was scrawled across the top. He flipped through the test quickly. Many of the answers marked wrong were correct. His logic perfect, his final solutions accurate. Yet beside them, Callahan had drawn red slashes without explanation. Around him, white classmates who had missed half their problems laughed about their B's and B-boss graphs. Jamal's jaw tightened. Something was wrong. He checked again, making sure he wasn't imagining it. The mistakes weren't his. They were manufactured. At home that night, Jamal buried the paper at the bottom of his backpack, unwilling to show it to his mother. Denise Carter had always believed in his brilliance, always told him he was destined for more than the world allowed. But how could he tell her that no matter how hard he worked, the system was already rigged against him? Day after day, more tests returned with similar results. His friends compared grades, boasting about their high scores despite careless mistakes. while Jamal's meticulously correct work came back tainted with red marks and indifferent comments, incomplete, needs more effort, sloppy, right? He wanted to argue. He wanted to march up to the teacher's desk and demand an explanation. But every time he thought about speaking up, Callahan's smirk returned in his mind, and the image of 30 pairs of eyes watching him crumble silenced him. So Jamal bottled it up. He buried his frustration under layers of silence, keeping his anger folded between the pages of his notebook. The racial undertones were not subtle. Jamal wasn't the only black student in the class, but he was the quietest, the one least likely to fight back. Others noticed how often black students were written up for small infractions, being late, whispering during lessons, forgetting a pencil while white students received warnings or leniency. One day, when a white student named Ryan forgot his homework, Callahan chuckled and said, "Don't let it happen again, son." When Jamal forgot a single page of notes, Callahan sneered, "You people never come prepared. No wonder you fall behind." The words stung more than the grade marks. You people. They weren't meant as a general scolding. They were meant as a line, drawn sharply, separating Jamal from the others. Still, Jamal said nothing. He carried the weight quietly, his silence mistaken for agreement, his brilliance buried deeper under the teacher's prejudice. Yet someone else was watching. Emily Sanders had remained alert, ever since she'd seen Jamal solve the impossible problem. Unlike the others, she noticed the deliberate way Callahan singled him out, the way his correct answers were dismissed, the way his papers returned marked unfairly. She didn't say anything, not yet, but her eyes followed the patterns no one else dared to acknowledge. Jamal, meanwhile, began shrinking in other classes too. Teachers who spoke with Callahan treated him as though he were already labeled lazy, inattentive, average at best. His reputation spread not by his work, but by the whispers of authority. It wasn't just the classroom. In the hallways, Jamal felt the stares. Students muttered that he was the teacher's favorite punching bag. Others teased him, repeating Callahan's lines, like rehearsed jokes. "Yo, Carter, you awake today? Don't forget your homework, man, or you'll drag the whole race down." The cruelty wasn't physical. It didn't need to be. Each remark landed like a small cut, and by the end of the week, Jamal was bleeding invisibly beneath his skin. At home, Denise noticed the changes. Jamal had grown quieter than usual, withdrawing into his room after school. His laughter, once rare but warm, had vanished completely. She tried to draw him out, asking about his day, but his answers were clipped, rehearsed. "Fine. It's whatever. Just school." Denise knew her son. Silence didn't mean nothing was wrong. It meant he was carrying something heavy. One Thursday evening, after dinner, Jamal left his backpack on the kitchen chair while he went to take a shower. Denise began clearing the table, humming softly, when the corner of a crumpled test paper peeked out of his bag. She pulled it free, smoothing the folds with her hand. Her eyes scanned the red marks, her brows furrowing deeper with each line. She wasn't a math expert, but she knew enough to see that many of the answers marked wrong were correct, precise, exact. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't just a mistake. This was deliberate. She flipped the paper over, reading Callahan's comment at the bottom, "Needs to apply himself more." Disappointing effort. Denise's hands trembled, the paper shaking between her fingers. She had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to see her son diminished by lies. Jamal wasn't lazy. He wasn't careless. He was brilliant. And this teacher, this system was trying to bury him. Her breath grew shallow as the realization sank in. Jamal hadn't been exaggerating when he shrugged about school. He had been protecting her, hiding the injustice so she wouldn't worry. But now Denise Carter had proof in her hand. As she held the paper, anger rising in her chest, she whispered to herself, "Not my son. Not this time." She reached for her phone, her finger hovering over the screen, torn between calling Jamal immediately or storming the school the next morning. The paper trembled in Denise Carter's hand long after she had read and reread the red slashes scarring its surface. She sat at the kitchen table, her lips pressed tight, her chest heaving with the kind of anger that builds, not from one wound, but from many. The silent accumulation of injustices that finally erupt in one undeniable moment. The house was quiet, except for the sound of water running upstairs, where Jamal was still in the shower. Denise kept staring at the page, her jaw tightening with every glance at the words, "Needs to apply himself more." Disappointing effort. She whispered it aloud, her voice sharp, as though the words themselves were poison she needed to spit out. Disappointing? My son? Her fists curled around the paper until the edges crinkled. Denise had raised Jamal to know his worth, to believe in his brilliance, even when the world seemed intent on making him doubt it. And yet, here was a teacher deliberately cutting him down, brick by brick. The water shut off upstairs. Denise quickly smoothed the paper against the table again, flattening the wrinkles. She had planned to wait until morning, to approach this carefully, but the rage in her chest burned too fiercely to contain. A few minutes later, Jamal padded into the kitchen, his hair damp, wearing a loose t-shirt and sweatpants. He froze when he saw the test paper on the table in front of his mother. His eyes widened. "Mom, sit down, Jamal," Denise said, her tone steady but heavy with authority. He hesitated, then pulled out the chair opposite her and sank into it. Shoulders hunched, his fingers tapped nervously against the wooden edge. "Explain this," Denise demanded, sliding the paper toward him. Jamal's eyes flicked to the page, then away again, his silence louder than any denial. "You got every single answer right, baby. Every one. I checked them twice. And yet he gave you a C." Denise's voice cracked, half with fury, half with heartbreak. "What's going on at that school?" Jamal stared down at his lap, his foot tapping against the linoleum floor. "It's nothing. Just let it go." Denise leaned forward, her hands gripping the table. "Nothing? Jamal, this man is trying to make you feel small. He's lying on your grades. He's calling you lazy, when you've worked harder than anyone I know. That's not nothing. That's an attack." Jamal finally met her eyes, his own dark with conflict. "If I say something, he'll just make it worse. He'll find another way to punish me. You don't get it, Mom. He wants me to fail, and if I fight him, I'll look like the problem. Like I'm being disrespectful." Denise's heart ached at the fear in his voice. He wasn't wrong. She knew how the world worked, how black boys who spoke up were painted as angry, difficult, or threatening. The same courage that was praised in white children was punished in her son. She reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "You are not the problem, Jamal. Do you hear me? You are not the problem." Tears stung his eyes, though he blinked them away quickly. "Then why does it feel like I'm the only one being picked on?" Denise's throat tightened. She wanted to shield him from this ugliness, but it was already wrapped around him. Instead, she pressed gently. "Show me your work, Jamal. Not what he gave you. Show me what you've been doing." For a moment, Jamal hesitated. Then, as though surrendering, he slipped away to his room and returned with a thick spiral notebook. He laid it on the table, its cover worn and frayed from constant use. Denise opened it carefully, like it was a sacred text. Page after page revealed line after line of complex equations, formulas, and proofs. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, and most shocking, far beyond anything a high school junior should be learning. Her eyes scanned a page filled with calculus notations, integrals and derivatives solved cleanly. She turned to another, where Jamal had worked through a series of multi-step trigonometric identities. "Baby?" Her voice broke. "This isn't just high school math. Where did you learn this?" Jamal shrugged, eyes downcast. I look it up. Online. In old library books. Sometimes I watch lectures." Denise felt her chest swell with pride and sorrow at once. Pride that her son's mind was soaring beyond the classroom, and sorrow that his genius was being crushed by someone who refused to see it. "You're doing calculus," she whispered, her hand trembling as she turned another page. "Calculus. Jamal, that's college-level work." He nodded faintly, still avoiding her gaze.
"I like it. It makes sense. Numbers. They don't lie to me the way people do."
Denise's eyes welled up. She reached out, brushing his cheek with her hand.
"You are extraordinary."
"Do you know that? Extraordinary." He shook his head slightly. "Not to him, not to anyone at school." Denise exhaled, steadying herself. "Then we'll show them. We'll keep every piece of this, Jamal. Every page, every test, every grade. They won't be able to deny who you are when we have the proof." From that night forward, Denise began quietly collecting. She photocopied Jamal's notebooks at the library, sliding the copies into a growing folder. She kept his graded papers, marking with sticky notes where his correct answers had been crossed out. Slowly, she built a case not just against Miss Callahan, but against the system that enabled him. Meanwhile, Jamal carried on at school, his silence mistaken for weakness. Callahan continued calling on him, mocking him, dismissing him. His classmates followed suit, the cycle of humiliation repeating itself daily. Yet behind closed doors, Denise was building armor for her son, proof of his brilliance, piece by piece. One evening, as Jamal worked at the kitchen table, Denise sat across from him, quietly watching. His pencil flew across the page, solving a calculus problem that most adults would have stumbled over. She marveled at the way his mind seemed to dance with the numbers, unafraid of their complexity. "Baby," she said softly, "one day they won't be able to ignore you. One day the world will see what I see." Jamal paused, looking up. His eyes were tired, wary, but a flicker of hope passed through them. Denise made a silent vow then, one that burned in her chest like a flame. She would not allow her son to be buried under prejudice, not while she had breath in her body. Still anger gnawed at her. Collecting papers and notebooks wasn't enough. Watching from the sidelines wasn't enough. She needed to see with her own eyes what was happening in that classroom. That night, lying awake in bed, Denise turned the thought over and over. She pictured Callahan smirking at her son, pictured Jamal shrinking under his gaze, and her fists clenched against the sheets. The decision came quietly but firmly. She would go to the school. She would sit in that classroom, blending in with the other parents when the chance came. And she would watch. She would see firsthand how her son was being treated. Her jaw tightened with resolve. If Callahan wanted to play games, she was ready. Denise closed Jamal's notebook, slid it carefully back into his bag, and whispered to herself, "Tomorrow, I'm going to see for myself." The morning air was crisp when Denise Carter pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders and stepped into Lincoln High School. She had walked through these halls countless times before for parent-teacher nights or school events, but this morning felt different. She wasn't here for paperwork or pleasantries. She was here to see with her own eyes. The school had announced that parents were welcome to sit in on certain classes as part of Parent Engagement Week. Denise had circled the date on her calendar the moment she'd heard. She told no one, not Jamal, not even her sister, because she needed her observation unfiltered, unshaped by anyone else's expectations. She entered Mr. Callahan's math class just as the bell rang. Students shuffled into their seats, their voices low and buzzing. Jamal sat in his usual spot near the wall, his shoulders slightly hunched, his gaze fixed on his notebook. He hadn't noticed her in the back corner, blending in with a few other parents scattered along the walls. Mr. Callahan strode in with his usual clipped energy, chalk already in hand. "Settle down," he barked, though the room was already quieting. He glanced at the parents, forcing a smile, before launching into the day's lesson. Denise watched closely. She saw how his eyes swept the room, not with warmth, not with encouragement, but with the precision of a hunter scanning for prey. And as she expected, they landed squarely on her son. "Mr. Carter," Callahan said loudly, pausing mid-equation. "Why don't you tell us what I just wrote on the board?" Jamal stiffened. He hadn't even looked up yet. His pencil was mid-stroke in his notebook. Denise felt her breath hitch. Her son raised his head slowly, his voice quiet. "It's the start of a quadratic equation." Callahan cocked his head. "The start? That's all you've got?" Some students laughed. Jamal pressed his lips together, his hands tightening around his pencil. Denise could see his knuckles whitening from across the room. Callahan turned back to the board, scribbling more numbers. "This, ladies and gentlemen, is why participation matters. Carter here likes to think sitting silently makes him look smart, but really it just shows he's not keeping up. Isn't that right?" The laughter spread wider this time, a chorus of whispers and giggles. Denise's stomach turned. She wanted to leap to her feet, to shout that Jamal was more than prepared, that he understood concepts far beyond what was being written on the board. But she forced herself to remain still, her nails digging into her palms. She had promised herself she would watch before she acted. Callahan continued, "Let's give him another chance. Carter, solve this." He underlined a long equation, one that sprawled across the blackboard in chalk dust. Jamal looked down, quickly working it out in his notebook. Denise recognized the focus in his eyes, the way his lips moved faintly, as he thought. He had it. She could tell he had it. But before Jamal could raise his hand, or even open his mouth, Callahan cut him off. "Too slow. See, this is what happens when you don't practice. Carter here is a cautionary tale, parents. Bright kid maybe, but wasted potential. Can't focus. Won't apply himself. And you can see the result. Denise's chest tightened like a vice. Parents around her exchanged glances, some nodding sympathetically, others leaning closer to whisper. She caught fragments of it. The Carter boy? Always trouble. Doesn't surprise me. Her jaw locked. Trouble? Her son had never been in a fight, never caused chaos, never disrespected anyone. Yet the label was already spreading, wrapped neatly around him like a brand. She turned back toward Jamal. He was silent, staring down at his desk, shoulders drawn in tightly, as though he were trying to fold himself smaller. Denise saw it, the quiet devastation of a child, learning that no matter what he did, the narrative would always be against him. For the rest of the period, Callahan continued in the same rhythm, teaching with one hand, undermining Jamal with the other. Every mistake from other students was brushed off with a laugh. You'll get it next time, buddy. But with Jamal, every hesitation was a failure, every silence an indictment. When the bell rang, students packed up quickly, their chatter filling the air. Denise stayed in her seat, waiting for the room to clear. Jamal hurried out without noticing her, his eyes fixed on the floor, his backpack slung low. Mr. Callahan stacked his papers at the desk, humming softly, as though he hadn't just stripped a child bare in front of 30 witnesses. Denise rose from her chair, her movements slow, deliberate. Mr. Callahan, she said evenly, stepping forward. He looked up, clearly surprised. Mrs. Carter? Oh, I didn't realize you were here today. His smile was thin, practiced, always glad to have parents engaged. Denise's voice was calm, but her eyes burned. I was engaged, all right? I saw exactly how you engaged with my son. Callahan chuckled, adjusting his tie. Jamal. Yes, he's a bright boy. But well, as you saw, he struggles with participation. Sometimes it helps to give him a little push. A little push? Denise repeated, her tone sharp but contained. What I saw wasn't a push. It was ridicule. Callahan's smile tightened. Mrs. Carter, I assure you, I treat all my students fairly. If Jamal feels singled out, it's because he isolates himself. He chooses not to engage. Denise's fists curled at her sides. She wanted to scream, to lay out every notebook page, every unfairly graded test, but she forced herself to inhale slowly, reminding herself that anger in this moment would only be twisted back against her. Instead, she gave him a long, cold look. I'll be speaking with the principal. Callahan's composure flickered, just for a second, before he recovered with another thin smile. Of course, you're welcome to do so. I stand by my teaching methods. Denise turned and walked out of the classroom, her steps deliberate, her back straight. She passed a pair of parents still lingering in the hallway, who glanced at her and whispered again, "That's his mom." Figures. Her blood boiled, but she didn't slow her pace. Outside, the autumn wind slapped against her cheeks, sharp and cold. She gripped the strap of her purse tightly, her mind racing. What she had just witnessed wasn't a misunderstanding, wasn't paranoia. It was systematic humiliation, carefully orchestrated. She thought of Jamal, hunched in his seat, swallowing his pain. She thought of the parents nodding along to Callahan's words, buying into the narrative that her son was wasted potential. And she thought of the file she had already started at home. The tests, the notebooks, the evidence. It wasn't enough to collect it quietly anymore. It was time to confront the system head-on. Denise stopped at the edge of the school parking lot, her breath steadying as resolve settled into her bones. She pulled out her phone, scrolled to the school's number, and pressed call. When the secretary answered, Denise's voice was calm, measured and unwavering. I'd like to schedule a private meeting with Principal Hawkins. It's about my son. The smell of floor polish lingered in the hallway outside the main office, as Denise Carter sat in the stiff wooden chair, her purse resting tightly against her lap. A clock ticked overhead, each second stretching longer than it should. She could feel her pulse in her fingertips. It had been 2 days since she'd watched Mr. Callahan humiliate Jamal in front of a room full of parents. 2 days since she'd dialed the school's number and demanded a meeting with the principal. Now, as she waited, she rehearsed her words, determined to stay calm yet firm. The secretary finally opened the door. Principal Hawkins will see you now. Denise rose, her heels clicking softly against the linoleum. She walked into the office and found Mr. Hawkins seated behind a large oak desk. He was a man in his late 50s with a silver mustache and a receding hairline, dressed in a dark suit that seemed too formal for the fluorescent-lit room. He gestured toward the chair across from him. "Mrs. Carter," he said smoothly. "Please, have a seat." Denise sat, her spine straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap, though every muscle in her body was tense. "I understand you wanted to discuss some concerns regarding Mr. Callahan." Hawkins began, his tone warm but faintly dismissive, as though this were routine. "Yes," Denise said firmly. "I was in his classroom earlier this week. I saw the way he singled out my son. I saw the way he mocked him, cut him off, dismissed his answers before he could even speak. And I've seen Jamal's work. I know he's doing far more advanced math than what he's given credit for. Yet his grades keep coming back low. Something isn't right." Hawkins leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, as if she'd just handed him a familiar complaint. "Mrs. Carter, I appreciate your involvement in your son's education. But I have to be honest, Jamal's name has come up in our reports before. There have been behavioral concerns, instances of disengagement, even notes about defiance." Denise's brows furrowed. "Defiance? Jamal is one of the quietest students you'll ever meet. He doesn't talk back. He doesn't disrupt. If anything, he stays silent to avoid trouble." Hawkins opened a folder on his desk and flipped through several sheets of paper. According to Mr. Callahan's documentation, Jamal consistently refuses to participate in class. He avoids answering questions, fails to turn in homework on time, and when pressed becomes argumentative. These behaviors indicate a pattern. Denise's jaw clenched. "With all due respect, Principal Hawkins, that's not a pattern. That's a fabrication. I've seen the assignments he brings home. I've watched him work through calculus problems on his own. I know how hard he studies. If he's quiet in class, it's because he's being targeted." Hawkins sighed, folding his hands together. "I don't doubt that Jamal is intelligent, but intelligence doesn't always translate into classroom discipline. Teachers have to maintain order. If Jamal feels singled out, perhaps it's a matter of perception." Denise's heart pounded in her chest. Perception. The word landed like a slap. So what I saw with my own eyes was perception. The laughter, the ridicule, the way Callahan used my son as an example of laziness in front of his peers and parents, that's perception. The principal's expression hardened slightly. "Mrs. Carter, I have to trust my staff. Mr. Callahan has been teaching here for over 20 years. He has an excellent record. When it comes down to conflicting accounts, I have to consider credibility. And mine isn't credible?" Denise asked sharply. "I'm not saying that," Hawkins replied, though his tone carried the weight of everything unsaid. Denise leaned forward, her voice low but burning. "What you're saying is that my son's word doesn't matter. That my word doesn't matter. That as long as Callahan writes something on a piece of paper, it becomes fact. That's not credibility. That's a system protecting itself." A tense silence stretched across the room. Hawkins shifted uncomfortably, but didn't respond. Denise sat back, her chest heaving with controlled rage. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for fairness. Look at his work. Look at his notebooks. Look at the tests marked wrong that are right. If you care about truth, you'll see it." Hawkins cleared his throat, closing the folder. "Mrs. Carter, if you'd like, we can arrange for Jamal to receive additional support services. Sometimes students who struggle with confidence benefit from extra tutoring or counseling." Denise almost laughed, though it came out as a sharp, bitter sound. "Tutoring? Counseling? My son doesn't need remediation. He needs recognition. He's not behind. He's ahead. The only thing holding him back is a teacher who refuses to see him." Hawkins held up a hand, his tone placating. "I understand your frustration, but without more evidence, there's little I can do. Perhaps we can revisit this conversation after the semester, once more data is available." More data, more waiting, more silence. Denise's stomach churned. She could feel the system closing ranks, building walls higher than any single parent could climb. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I'll get you evidence, Principal Hawkins. You'll have more than you can ignore." Hawkins rose as well, his expression polite but cool. "I look forward to it." Denise walked out of the office with her head high, but inside fury threatened to consume her. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing in the realization she'd known deep down, all along. This wasn't just about one teacher. This was about an institution that would always believe the teacher over the child, the white authority over the black student. Outside, she paused in the hallway, taking a steadying breath before leaving the building. She knew what she had to do now. Document everything, protect Jamal, and prepare for a battle that would not be won easily. That afternoon, Jamal sat at his desk in math class, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, his mind distant. He hadn't known about his mother's meeting yet, but he could sense the outcome without needing to ask. Adults never seemed to believe him. Teachers didn't listen. Principals didn't listen. It was as though his silence made him invisible, until they wanted to use it against him. Mr. Callahan continued his lesson, pausing at intervals to glance Jamal's way. "Mr. Carter," he said suddenly, "what's the answer to number 6? Jamal hesitated, then quietly offered the correct solution. Callahan tilted his head. "Interesting. That's one way of doing it. A risky guess though. Probably just coincidence." The class laughed again. Jamal's stomach dropped. No matter how precise he was, no matter how quick, the story was already written for him. His correctness was never his own. He stared at his notebook, his pencil tapping rhythmically, his chest aching with the weight of isolation. And then in the corner of his eye, he noticed movement. Emily Sanders, sitting a few rows away, had torn a small flyer from her binder. She hesitated, glancing toward the teacher to make sure he wasn't watching. Then, as the bell rang and students began to shuffle out, she slipped past Jamal's desk and let the folded paper fall onto his notebook. He looked up, startled, but Emily didn't say anything. She just gave him a brief, knowing look before hurrying out with the crowd. Jamal waited until the room cleared. He unfolded the paper slowly, his heart thudding as he read the words. "Regional Mathematics Contest. Open to all high school students. Registration deadline approaching." For the first time in weeks, something shifted in Jamal's chest. A flicker of possibility, a spark beneath the ashes of humiliation. Jamal gripped the flyer in his hand, torn between disbelief and hope. Could this be the chance to prove himself beyond the four walls of Callahan's classroom? Jamal sat on the bus ride home, the flyer folded carefully in his hand, as though it were both a fragile treasure and a dangerous secret. The hum of the engine and the chatter of students around him blurred into white noise. His eyes stayed fixed on the bold letters, Regional Mathematics Contest. The words carried weight, opportunity, exposure, a stage far bigger than Mr. Callahan's classroom. And yet the longer he stared, the heavier the doubt grew in his chest. By the time he stepped off at his stop, his hands were sweaty against the paper. He slipped it into his backpack quickly, almost guiltily, before walking the cracked sidewalk toward his apartment complex. The next morning, Jamal moved through the school day like a shadow. He avoided Emily's gaze in the hallway, unsure of what to say. Why had she given him the flyer? What did she expect? Didn't she know how impossible it felt to even imagine standing in a competition like that, with judges and students from wealthy schools who had tutors, resources, and teachers who believed in them? It wasn't until lunch that she cornered him. Emily slid her tray down across from his, sitting with casual ease, though her eyes burned with quiet determination. Jamal kept his head down, poking at his sandwich. "You saw the flyer," she said matter-of-factly. Jamal hesitated, then nodded. "And?" she pressed. He exhaled slowly. "I'm nothing. I'm not signing up." Emily leaned forward. "Why not? You're easily the smartest person in that class." Jamal's jaw tightened. "Smart doesn't matter when nobody believes you. Callahan would just laugh if he heard I signed up. Everyone would. They'd say I cheated. They always do." Emily studied him, her voice softening. "Jamal, I saw your notebook. I saw how you solved that problem the other day, faster than anyone else could have even started. That wasn't luck. That was genius." He shook his head quickly, his chest tightening. "Don't say that. Don't." His voice cracked, and he lowered it to a whisper. "People like me don't get called that. They call us lazy, troublemakers. If I sign up, I'll just prove them right when I fail." Emily was quiet for a moment, her eyes thoughtful. Then she spoke with quiet conviction. "Or you'll prove them wrong in a way they can't ignore." Jamal froze at her words. Something about the certainty in her tone unsettled him. No one had ever spoken about him like that, not even Denise, who loved him unconditionally, but always with the cautiousness of someone who knew how cruel the world could be. Emily spoke like his brilliance was fact, not hope. "Look," she continued, "I'll help you. We can practice after school. I'll quiz you, sit with you while you work through problems. I'm not as advanced as you, but I can keep up. You won't be alone." Jamal glanced at her, suspicion flickering in his eyes. "Why are you doing this?" Emily hesitated, then shrugged lightly. Because I hate seeing someone brilliant get silenced. And because she gave a small smile. Because I like being right, and I know I'm right about you. For the first time in weeks, Jamal felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward. Almost a smile. That afternoon, he sat at the library table across from Emily, his notebook open, pencil poised. She slid a sheet of practice problems toward him. Let's start simple, she said. Jamal scanned the page, then quickly began writing, his hand moving in clean, fluid motions. Within minutes, the first set of problems was solved, each step meticulously laid out. Emily leaned over, eyebrows rising. That took you what, 5 minutes? I've been working on those for a week. Jamal ducked his head, embarrassed. They're not that hard. Not for you, she countered, grinning. They moved on to harder problems, Emily timing him with her phone, challenging him to beat the clock. Jamal resisted at first, his nerves buzzing, but soon the numbers pulled him in. The equations unfolded in his mind like familiar songs, each solution landing with precision. For the first time in months, he felt something he'd almost forgotten: joy. Emily clapped softly after one solution. See? You belong in that contest. You'd crush it. But Jamal's face remained serious. Belonging isn't about solving problems. It's about who they think should solve them. And they don't think it's me. Emily leaned forward, her tone sharper now. Then make them rethink. You can't change Callahan's mind, but you can show everyone else. Show them on a stage where he can't erase your answers or dismiss you. The words sank deep into Jamal's chest. He stared at his notebook, the equations glowing back at him like a lifeline. Over the next week, they met almost every day after school, in the library, at Emily's kitchen table, even in the park, notebooks balanced on their knees. Jamal resisted at first, weighed down by doubt, but slowly he began to loosen. He solved problems with increasing speed, his steps more confident, his explanations clearer. Emily pushed him, encouraging him to explain his thought process aloud, forcing him to own his brilliance instead of hiding it. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of orange across the library windows, Emily leaned back in her chair, watching Jamal scribble another solution. You know what I think? She said. Jamal glanced up, wary. What? I think you were afraid of winning. He froze, pencil in midair. Emily continued. If you win, they'll have no choice but to see you. And maybe that scares you more than failing. The words hit harder than he expected. He swallowed, unable to respond. Emily softened. But that's why I'm here. To remind you that being seen isn't something to fear. It's something you deserve. For a moment, Jamal let himself believe her. He let the idea of winning, not just surviving, enter his mind. At home, Denise noticed the change. Jamal's eyes carried a spark she hadn't seen in months. He came home later, notebooks fuller, posture straighter. She didn't know yet about the contest, but she sensed something was different. She didn't press him. She just watched with quiet pride as he worked late into the night, his pencil moving with the energy of someone rediscovering himself. By the end of the week, Jamal's notebook was overflowing with solved problems. Emily had registered him for the contest. He hadn't stopped her when she filled out the form with his name, though doubt still gnawed at him. The morning after, he stuffed the flyer deep into his backpack, as though burying the evidence of his new secret. He wasn't ready for Callahan, or anyone else to know. But secrets have a way of surfacing. It was Friday afternoon when Callahan's sharp voice cut through the classroom. Carter, come up here and hand me your homework. Jamal froze. His backpack sat at his feet, unzipped just enough for the folded flyer to peek from one corner. Callahan bent down to collect the papers, his eyes catching the edge of the glossy sheet. He tugged it free before Jamal could react. The classroom went still. Callahan held the flyer between two fingers, his lips curling into a cold smile. Well, he said, his voice dripping with mock amusement. What do we have here? Jamal's stomach dropped, as Callahan waved the contest flyer in the air, eyes narrowing. The Carter boy thinks he's ready for a math competition. The flyer dangled in Mr. Callahan's hand like bait. His smirk widened as he waved it above his head, catching the attention of every student in the classroom. The chatter died down, the sound of pencils against paper fading into silence. All eyes shifted to Jamal. Well, isn't this interesting? Callahan's voice boomed, coated with mock enthusiasm. Looks like our quiet Mr. Carter thinks he's ready for a regional mathematics competition. A ripple of laughter passed through the room. Some students exchanged amused glances. Others whispered under their breath. Jamal's chest tightened. He wanted to shrink into the floor, disappear into the cracks between the tiles. Callahan paced slowly toward the front of the room, still holding the flyer aloft like evidence in a trial. Now let's think about this, class. A competition, regional. The best and brightest from across the district. Do we honestly believe this is the right place for a boy who can't even answer a simple question in class without stumbling? The words hit like stones. A few students chuckled. Others looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Silence, in that room, was as cruel as laughter. Jamal's throat burned, but no sound came out. He kept his eyes fixed on his notebook, the numbers on the page blurring. Callahan stopped in front of the chalkboard, shaking his head as though the very idea were absurd. You see, contests like this aren't for everyone. They're for students who apply themselves, who work hard, who actually belong in advanced settings. Not. He glanced at Jamal, letting the pause hang heavy in the air. Not kids like you. The laughter that followed was sharper this time, cutting deeper. Jamal's fists tightened beneath his desk. His face felt hot, his chest heavy. Kids like you. The words echoed, carrying more than just a personal insult. They carried history. They carried every stereotype, every dismissal that black students before him had endured. Emily's eyes flashed with anger. She slammed her notebook shut, the sound cracking against the silence. That's not fair, she said, her voice steady but fierce. He's smarter than half this room. The class froze. A few heads whipped toward her, shocked that anyone had dared to interrupt Callahan. The teacher's smirk vanished, his expression hardening. Excuse me, Miss Sanders. Emily didn't back down. I've seen him work through problems you couldn't even dream up. He belongs in that contest more than anyone here. Gasps fluttered across the room. Callahan's jaw clenched. His tone dropped lower, sharper. That's enough. Sit down and keep your opinions to yourself. But the damage was done. Whispers spread across the room. Some students looked at Jamal differently now. Curious, skeptical, even grudgingly impressed. Jamal, however, didn't lift his head. The weight pressing against him was too heavy. Emily's defense was a spark, but Callahan's words still rang louder in his ears. The teacher glanced at the flyer again, then, with deliberate slowness, tore it in half. The sound of paper ripping filled the room. He tore it again, and again, until the pieces fluttered into the trash can like fallen leaves. There, Callahan said coldly. Problem solved. Carter won't embarrass himself or this school by pretending to be something he's not. The bell rang moments later, releasing the students in a rush of noise. Jamal stayed frozen in his seat, staring at the shredded flyer in the trash. Emily lingered too, her eyes burning with fury. As the room emptied, she leaned toward him. Don't listen to him. He's scared. He knows how good you are. Jamal shook his head slowly, his voice breaking. No one's scared of me. They just want to remind me I don't belong. Emily placed a hand gently on his notebook. Then prove you do. Sign up anyway. He can't stop you unless you let him. That night, Jamal sat at the kitchen table, his backpack slumped beside him. Denise entered the room, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She noticed his slouched shoulders, the way his pencil lay untouched on his open notebook. What happened today? She asked softly. Jamal hesitated, then whispered. He found the flyer, tore it up, told me kids like me don't belong in contests like that. Denise's chest constricted. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat, her eyes fierce but calm. And do you believe him? Jamal's eyes watered, though he blinked the tears back. Sometimes, I think he's right. Everyone laughs. No one ever believes me. Maybe I just embarrass myself. Denise reached across the table, lifting his chin gently so he would meet her gaze. Jamal Carter, listen to me. You've been solving calculus since you were 13. You've taught yourself things most adults can't do. That man is terrified, not of you failing, but of you succeeding, because your success exposes his lies. Her words lingered, sinking into him like sunlight breaking through clouds. Denise leaned back, her tone steady. If you want to do this, I'll support you. I'll pay the registration fee. I'll drive you there myself, whatever it takes. But you have to decide that your future isn't going to be defined by his words. Jamal looked down at his notebook, the numbers blurred by the sting in his eyes. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe Emily. But the years of being dismissed, mocked, erased. It was hard to untangle all of that in a single night. Still, something stirred. A quiet, defiant spark. 2 days later, Jamal stood at the mailbox outside his apartment complex. In his hand was a fresh copy of the flyer Emily had printed for him, neatly filled out with his information. The registration form felt heavy, as though the paper itself carried all his doubts and hopes. He looked around, scanning the street. No one was watching. The air was crisp, the sun dipping low behind the buildings. Jamal hesitated, his heart pounding. He could still turn back. He could still pretend he'd never tried. But then he heard Emily's voice in his head. Prove you do. Sign up anyway. He heard his mother's voice too. Your success exposes his lies. His hand trembled as he slid the envelope into the mailbox slot. It slipped from his fingers and dropped with a soft thud. Jamal exhaled, his chest tight but lighter somehow, as if he had just made a choice bigger than himself. He turned to leave, unaware that across the street, behind the tinted window of a parked car, Mr. Callahan sat watching the morning of the competition arrived with a gray sky that threatened rain. Jamal sat in the back seat of his mother's car, staring out the window as the city blurred past. His backpack sat heavy on his lap, filled with sharpened pencils, notebooks, and in the weight of expectation. Denise gripped the steering wheel tightly, glancing at her son in the rearview mirror. She wanted to tell him again how proud she was, how much she believed in him, but she could see the storm in his eyes. He was already fighting enough battles inside his own head. You ready? She asked softly. Jamal hesitated before answering. I don't know. Denise's lips pressed into a thin line. You don't have to be ready for them. Just be ready for you. That's enough. He didn't respond, but he held on to her words like a thread. The competition was held at a sleek auditorium downtown, filled with rows of students from private schools and magnet academies. Their uniforms were crisp, their teachers bustling around them like coaches before a championship game. Jamal walked in quietly, his hoodie pulled low, Denise by his side. He felt their eyes before he saw them. The quick glances, the raised brows, a few whispered. He didn't need to hear the words. He knew what they were saying. Who's he? Where's he from? He doesn't look like us. Emily was already inside, waving at him from a seat near the front. She had convinced her parents to let her come, though they didn't understand why she was so invested. When Jamal joined her, she grinned. Told you you'd make it. He sank into the chair, clutching his backpack straps. Making it here isn't the same as winning. Emily leaned closer. You don't need to win today. You just need to remind yourself you belong here. The first round began with written problems, projected on a large screen. Students bent over their papers, pencils scratching in furious rhythm. Jamal's heart pounded as the first problem flashed, a calculus derivative. His nerves melted the moment he started writing. Numbers poured from his mind onto the page, step by step, precise and fluid. He finished before the timer halfway ticked down. For the first time, he glanced up, noticing how others still struggled. Confidence flickered. Not a flame, not yet, but a spark. One by one, the problems grew harder. Integrals, trigonometric identities, number theory puzzles. Jamal's pencil never stopped moving. Each solution was another breath, another piece of proof that he was more than Callahan's caricature of laziness. When time was called, Jamal set his pencil down calmly, his page filled from top to bottom with neat solutions. Around him, students groaned, flipped their pencils in frustration, or whispered to one another. Emily caught his eye and mouthed, See? At the lunch break, the scoreboard went up. Jamal scanned the screen nervously, his pulse quickening. His name sat at the top 5 list. Carter, J. 92 points. For a second, he didn't breathe. His throat tightened, not with fear, but with disbelief. Emily gasped, You're in the top 5. Jamal, do you see that? A few other students looked at him, their faces a mix of curiosity and resentment. One boy from a private academy muttered, Must be a mistake. But the scoreboard didn't lie. Denise, standing in the audience section, pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes glistening. She wanted to cheer, to shout, but she stayed composed, letting her pride settle quietly in her chest. Jamal sat down, his hands trembling slightly. For the first time in his life, numbers had given him something no one could erase: visibility. The second round shifted to live problem solving on stage. Each student was called up to the whiteboard to solve a problem under the watchful eyes of the judges and the audience. Jamal's turn came sooner than he expected. His legs felt heavy as he walked to the board, the weight of hundreds of eyes pressing against his back. The problem appeared on the projector, a complex trigonometric equation, the kind Callahan would have used to humiliate him. Jamal's hand shook as he picked up the marker. He stared at the problem for a moment, his mind blank. The room felt hot, his throat dry. He could hear whispers behind him. He's stuck. He doesn't belong here. Then he remembered Emily's voice. You don't need to win. Just remind yourself you belong. His grip steadied. Slowly at first, then faster. He wrote each step, his mind unfolding the problem like a map. Sines and cosines collapsed into simple terms, the equation shrinking until the solution was clear. When he circled the final answer, silence filled the room. Then applause. Genuine, loud, undeniable. Jamal turned, marker still in hand, his chest rising and falling. He saw Emily clapping wildly, Denise wiping tears from her cheeks. Even the judges nodded. For the first time, Jamal felt taller than the whispers. By the end of the day, Jamal had advanced to the finals. His name was displayed again on the screen, this time in bold. He sat in the audience afterward, numb with disbelief. Emily nudged him, grinning ear to ear. Told you, you're unstoppable. Denise squeezed his shoulder gently. Baby, do you feel it now? Do you feel what I've always known? Jamal didn't answer. He couldn't. His chest was too full of pride, of fear, of a fragile hope he didn't know how to hold. The auditorium buzzed with energy as the crowd began to file out. Students congratulated one another. Teachers patted their protégés on the back. Jamal kept his head low, overwhelmed but glowing inside. And then a voice cut through the noise like ice water. Well, look who thinks he's a prodigy. Jamal froze. His stomach dropped. Standing near the doorway, arms crossed and lips curled in a familiar sneer, was Mr. Callahan. Jamal's breath caught. He hadn't expected him here. Not in this space. Not in this moment of fragile triumph. Emily's smile faded instantly, her eyes narrowing. Denise's face hardened, her hand tightening on Jamal's shoulder. Callahan stepped closer, his voice dripping with disdain. Enjoying your little spotlight? Don't get too comfortable. One contest doesn't erase a record of laziness. Everyone here might clap, but I know the truth. Denise's body tensed, ready to speak, but Jamal's heart raced too fast to hear anything else. The applause in his ears faded, replaced by Callahan's sneering voice. The triumph he had felt moments ago threatened to crumble under the weight of one man's bitterness. Jamal gripped the edge of his chair, his knuckles white, as Callahan leaned closer and whispered so only he could hear. I'll make sure this is the last stage you ever stand on. The auditorium still hummed with energy from the day's competition. Students packed their belongings, teachers huddled to compare notes, and families gathered in small groups to celebrate. Jamal sat near the front, his body still buzzing with the rush of solving the live problem on stage. For the first time, he had felt the weight of eyes on him, not as judgment but as recognition. But the moment of fragile triumph cracked the instant Mr. Callahan appeared. His presence slithered through the air like a shadow, poisoning everything it touched. Jamal's shoulders stiffened. Emily noticed and whispered quickly, "Ignore him. He doesn't belong here." Denise leaned down, her voice tight with control. "Don't give him your fear, baby. He feeds on it." But Jamal could already feel Callahan's eyes burning into him. The teacher wasn't here to spectate. He was here to destroy. When the announcement came for finalists to stay behind for verification and interviews, Jamal's name was called. His stomach flipped, a mix of pride and nerves. Emily squeezed his arm. "This is it, finals, Jamal." But as he rose, Callahan moved too. The teacher strode toward the group of judges, gathered near the stage. His steps were purposeful, his voice raised just enough to draw attention. "Excuse me," Callahan said smoothly, sliding into the circle of judges. "I think we need to discuss something important about one of your contestants." The judges looked up startled. One of them, a tall man with glasses and a clipboard, adjusted his tie. "And you are?" "Richard Callahan," he said, extending his hand. "I've been teaching mathematics for over 20 years at Lincoln High, and I happen to know one of your top scorers quite well, Jamal Carter." Jamal froze mid-step. His pulse hammered in his ears. Emily's hand tightened around his sleeve. Denise straightened in her seat, her instincts bristling. The judges exchanged polite nods. "Yes, Jamal Carter," one said. "An impressive performance today." Callahan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Impressive, yes. Suspicious, More likely. A ripple of tension moved through the small circle. What do you mean? Another judge asked cautiously. Callahan leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to force them to listen carefully. Jamal is not the student he appeared to be today. At school, he barely participates. His test scores are mediocre at best. He's frequently disengaged, even defiant when pressed. This sudden display of advanced ability, it doesn't add up. The words sank heavy, deliberate. Jamal felt them slice through the air, painting him as a fraud before he could even open his mouth. One judge frowned. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting, Callahan interrupted smoothly, that perhaps he had outside help, or access to the questions beforehand, or that someone else has been solving these problems for him. It happens. More often than you'd like to admit. Students desperate to impress, cutting corners. Denise shot to her feet. That is a lie. Her voice rang across the auditorium, sharp and unwavering. Heads turned. My son has been working at this level for years. You've been suppressing him, not teaching him. Callahan's face didn't flinch. He kept his tone calm, almost paternal. Mrs. Carter, I understand a mother's pride, but my responsibility is to academic integrity. If Jamal really is as capable as he appeared today, let him prove it here and now, in front of us all. With no preparation, no notes, no chance of outside interference. The judges shifted uneasily. Their silence said more than words. They were listening. They were considering. Jamal's chest burned. He had already proven himself once, but Callahan's accusations wrapped around him like chains. The same old story, his brilliance always in question, his word never enough. Emily leaned close, whispering fiercely. This is your moment. Show them. Show him. Denise's eyes locked on her son. You don't owe them another ounce of yourself, she said softly, though her voice shook with rage. But if you want to, if you need to, then do it for you, not for him. Jamal looked between them, then at the judges, who now waited expectantly. The auditorium was quieter, students and parents leaning closer to catch what would happen next. His throat felt tight, but his mind, the part of him that always found refuge in numbers, began to stir. I'll do it, he said, his voice steady, louder than he expected. Callahan's smirk returned, thin and cruel. One of the judges nodded to an assistant, who quickly handed Jamal a marker. A fresh problem appeared on the screen. A multi-layered integral, dense and intimidating, the kind designed to expose weakness. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even some of the advanced students shifted uncomfortably. Jamal stepped toward the whiteboard. His palms were damp, his chest rising and falling too fast. For a moment, the symbols blurred. He heard Callahan's voice behind him. Kids like you don't belong here. Then he remembered Denise's words. Numbers don't lie. He uncapped the marker, drew the first step, and the fog began to clear. Piece by piece, the problem unfolded. He worked methodically, his strokes precise, each transformation flowing into the next. Integration by parts, simplification, substitution. Where others saw chaos, he saw symmetry. The judges leaned forward. Parents whispered. The room fell into a hush, broken only by the squeak of the marker. At one point Jamal paused, his mind racing 2 steps ahead, calculating silently. Callahan smirked as though he'd caught him faltering. But then Jamal moved again, circling terms, canceling variables, driving toward the solution with renewed clarity. His back straightened, his pace quickened. Finally, with a final stroke, he wrote the answer clearly at the bottom. He set the marker down, his breathing heavy but steady. Silence. Then, one by one, the judges nodded. Correct, the man with glasses said firmly. Applause erupted. Loud, sustained, undeniable. The sound filled the auditorium, drowning out Callahan's shadow. Emily leapt to her feet, clapping until her palms stung. Denise covered her face, tears spilling through her fingers. Jamal turned slightly, scanning the crowd. For the first time, he didn't shrink under the weight of eyes. He stood taller. Callahan, however, stayed rooted where he was, his expression darkening. The applause rolled over him, but his eyes never left Jamal. When the noise finally settled, the lead judge cleared his throat. Jamal Carter advances to the finals. The announcement sent another wave of cheers through the room. Jamal's name glowed on the scoreboard again, solid and undeniable. Emily grabbed his arm. You did it. Finals, Jamal. They can't deny you now. Denise pulled him into a hug, whispering fiercely, That's my boy. They'll never erase you again. For a brief moment, Jamal let the pride wash over him. The years of ridicule, the erasure, the red slashes across correct answers, all of it felt distant, overshadowed by this moment of truth. But then, as the crowd dispersed and students prepared for the next round, Callahan stepped closer. His smile was gone, replaced by something colder. He leaned in, his voice low, just for Jamal to hear. "This isn't over. You embarrassed me today, but trust me, by the time this is done, I'll put you in your place." The words cut through Jamal's pride like ice. He stared at the teacher, his stomach tightening, realizing that while he had won the battle, the war was far from over. Jamal clenched his fists by his side, caught between triumph and dread, as Callahan walked away with the quiet certainty of someone plotting his next move. On Monday morning, when Jamal walked through the front doors of Lincoln High, it felt like stepping onto a stage he hadn't asked for. Heads turned, conversations hushed when he passed. Some students looked at him with awe, others with smirks. The weekend competition had traveled through the school like wildfire, twisting with every retelling. By third period, the story had hardened into something crueler. He embarrassed Callahan, one boy whispered near the lockers. Made him look stupid in front of all those judges, another added. He probably cheated. No way. Carter's that smart. The words stung, but none surprised Jamal. He'd seen this pattern before, how success didn't erase prejudice but often made it worse. His victory at the competition hadn't rewritten his story. It had simply given the school a new reason to target him. In the classroom, Callahan carried himself with brittle composure. He never mentioned the contest, never acknowledged Jamal's achievement, but his silence screamed louder than words. The smirk he once wore when mocking Jamal was gone, replaced by a tightness around the eyes, a sharpness in his tone. Page 14-6, Callahan announced one morning. "We'll work through problems 7 to 15. Pair up, except Carter. You can work alone." Students chuckled nervously, glancing at Jamal, who sat stiffly at his desk. He bent his head over his notebook, cheeks burning, determined not to give Callahan the satisfaction of a reaction. Emily shifted in her seat, glaring at the teacher, but said nothing. Even she knew, speaking out again would only draw more venom. The hostility spread beyond Callahan's classroom. In the teacher's lounge, whispers circulated. Jamal overheard fragments when he passed by. Callahan said the boy humiliated him in front of a whole panel. "Some of these kids, they just get too big for their britches.
They'll fall back down soon enough."
Teachers who once offered him polite smiles in the hallway now avoided his gaze. One science teacher refused to let him join a lab group, claiming it was fairer if he worked alone. Another marked him tardy even when he had arrived on time. Small slights piled up like stones in his backpack. Among his classmates, the whispers split into two camps. Some admired him in secret, curious about how he had solved problems no one else could touch. A few even asked him for help with homework, their voices hushed as though speaking to him openly carried risk. But others, emboldened by Callahan's disdain, resented him. "Think you're better than us now?" one boy sneered in the cafeteria. "Enjoy it while it lasts," another muttered as Jamal walked past. Even the admiration carried its own poison. Questions laced with suspicion, compliments coated in doubt. "Did you really solve it yourself? Did Emily help you? Did your mom pay someone to coach you?" The attention felt less like recognition and more like surveillance. At home, Denise tried to protect the fragile spark she'd seen ignite in her son. She celebrated his achievement, cooking his favorite meal, telling relatives proudly, but she also noticed the way he grew quieter each evening, the slump in his shoulders when he returned from school. "What's happening, baby?" she asked one night at the kitchen table. Jamal shrugged, staring at the untouched food on his plate. "It's worse now. Before they ignored me. Now they want to break me." Denise's throat tightened. She reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "They can't break what they didn't build." He wanted to believe her, but each day at school felt heavier, the walls closing in. The pressure came to a head one Friday afternoon. Callahan handed back graded assignments, slapping the papers down on desks with deliberate force. When Jamal's paper landed in front of him, he felt his stomach drop. A bold red D was scrawled at the top. He flipped through the pages quickly. His answers were right, step by step, flawless. Yet in the margins, Callahan had written comments: incomplete, weak explanation, needs effort. Jamal's hands shook. Around him, students leaned closer, whispering, Thought he was some math genius. Guess not. Emily craned her neck, her eyes widening as she saw his work. She opened her mouth to protest but caught Jamal's warning glance. He shook his head ever so slightly, begging her not to make it worse. The humiliation spread through him like fire. Callahan had erased his victory with a single stroke of red ink, and the class swallowed it whole, eager to believe the lie. That night, Jamal sat at his desk, staring at the paper under the dim glow of his lamp. His notebook lay open beside it, filled with the same solutions, neat and correct. Two versions of the truth, one undeniable, one fabricated. He thought of the judges who had clapped for him, the applause that had made him feel, briefly, seen. Now it felt like a dream he had woken from too soon. Denise knocked gently on his door, then stepped inside. She picked up the paper, scanning the red marks. Her eyes hardened. "He's doing it again," she said, her voice low with fury. "Marking you wrong when you're right." Jamal's voice cracked. "He'll never stop, no matter what I do. He'll make me fail." Denise crouched beside him, holding his face in her hands. "You listen to me. Your grades are his lies, not your truth. But we're going to fight this, Jamal. We're going to build so much evidence they can't bury you again." He nodded faintly, but the doubt lingered in his eyes. Over the next week, the whispers grew louder. Students passed the story along. Carter got a D. Guessed the contest was a fluke. Teachers nodded knowingly, reinforcing the narrative. Even Emily struggled to counter it. "I know the truth," she whispered fiercely one afternoon. "But how do we make them see it?" Jamal didn't answer. He felt himself shrinking again, retreating into silence, the red mark on his paper louder than all the clapping at the contest. On the final day of the grading period, Jamal logged into the school portal during study hall, his hands clammy as he typed his password. The screen loaded slowly, the numbers appearing line by line. His heart stopped. Math. The letter glared at him in bold red. His overall semester grade had plummeted, dragging his GPA with it. For a moment the room seemed to spin. His breath came shallow. The world outside the screen faded, replaced by the crushing weight of failure. Not real failure. Manufactured failure. Callahan's sabotage etched into the digital record, as permanent as ink. Emily, sitting beside him, gasped when she saw the screen. "No, that's impossible. You've been perfect on everything." He rigged it. Jamal couldn't speak. He closed the laptop slowly, his hands trembling, the weight of systemic injustice pressing down harder than ever. Across the room, Callahan watched from his desk, a faint smile playing on his lips, as if to say, "I told you, Carter. I'll always decide where you belong." The night Jamal's failing grade appeared on the school porta, Denise sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open in front of her. The harsh red F glared back, an ugly scar on the screen. Jamal sat across from her, silent, his face pale. His hands were folded tightly in his lap, fingers digging into one another as if he could keep himself from unraveling. Denise stared at the screen for a long time, her chest heaving. Then she shut the laptop with a sharp snap. "Enough," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. "This has gone too far." Jamal didn't look up. His voice was barely a whisper. "What's the point, Mom? He won. He'll always win." Denise reached across the table, gripping her son's chin and lifting his face so their eyes met. Her own eyes burned with rage and pain. "Listen to me. You are not failing. He is failing you, and I'm not going to let it stand." The next morning, Denise marched into Lincoln High with a folder in her hand. Inside were copies of Jamal's notebooks, pages of correct work, and printouts of graded assignments where right answers had been marked wrong. She had highlighted the inconsistencies, page after page, determined to leave no room for denial. She didn't wait for an appointment. She strode into the office, her heels striking the tile like a drumbeat of defiance. "I need to see Principal Hawkins. Now." The secretary blinked at her, startled. "Do you have a—" "No," Denise cut her off. "This is urgent. My son's future is being sabotaged, and I won't be brushed aside." Her tone left no room for argument. Minutes later, she was ushered into Hawkins' office. The principal looked up from his desk, sighing as though already exhausted. "Mrs. Carter. Again." "Yes, again," Denise shot back, dropping the folder onto his desk. "Because the harassment hasn't stopped. It's escalated. Now my son is failing a class he's excelling in. You explain that." Hawkins opened the folder reluctantly, flipping through the pages. His brow furrowed slightly at the neat columns of equations, the precision of Jamal's solutions. But his expression quickly smoothed back into neutrality. These are impressive, he admitted. But grades aren't only about getting the right answer. They're about showing your work, participating, following classroom expectations. Denise leaned forward, her voice sharp. He's shown his work. Right here. He participates when he isn't mocked into silence. The only expectation he's failing to meet is Mr. Callahan's prejudice. Hawkins stiffened. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation, Denise snapped. It's the truth. And I have proof. The principal closed the folder and folded his hands atop it. Mrs. Carter, even if I wanted to, I can't simply overturn a teacher's grades. That would violate school policy. If you believe an error has been made, the correct procedure is to file a formal grievance. A review board will be assigned, and the matter will be investigated in due course. Denise's voice rose, trembling with fury. In due course? While my son's GPA sinks? While scholarships slip out of reach? While his reputation is destroyed? You want me to wait while you shuffle paperwork and protect your staff? Hawkins' jaw tightened. We must follow procedure. And Mr. Callahan is a respected teacher. His records show consistency in his evaluations. Consistency and discrimination. Denise shot back. Do you even hear yourself? You're not protecting education. You're protecting him. The principal's eyes hardened. Mrs. Carter, I suggest you lower your tone. Shouting will not help your son. Denise stared at him, her breath coming fast. She realized then, with brutal clarity, that the system wasn't just ignoring her, it was complicit. She rose slowly, her eyes never leaving his. Then hear this. If the school won't protect my son, I will, and you'll regret underestimating us. She snatched the folder back, turned on her heel, and stormed out. That afternoon, Jamal sat in his room, staring at the ceiling. His notebook lay unopened on the desk beside him. He hadn't touched a pencil since seeing the failing grade. When Denise entered, she found him slumped in his chair, his face hollow. Baby, she said gently, sitting on the edge of his bed, we're going to fight this. I promise you. Jamal shook his head slowly. What's the point? You'll just find another way. Even if you prove he cheated the grades, you'll say I don't participate, or that I'm disruptive. Everyone believes him. Nobody believes me. His voice cracked on the last word. He turned his face away, ashamed of the tears brimming in his eyes. Denise's heart shattered. She pulled him into her arms, holding him tightly. You hear me, Jamal? You are brilliant. Nothing he does can take that away. Not a red pen, not an F, not 1,000 lies. But Jamal didn't respond. He sat in her embrace, heavy and silent, the fight draining out of him. Later that evening, Emily called. Denise handed Jamal the phone reluctantly, unsure if he would answer. Hey, Emily said softly on the other end. Hey, Jamal muttered, his voice flat. I saw your grade online, she continued. It's not real. Everyone knows it. No, Jamal whispered. Everyone believes it. They'll remember the F, not the contest. Emily paused, then spoke with quiet urgency. You can't let him win like this. You're too good. Jamal, I've sat with you for hours. I've seen you solve problems that stump textbooks. You're special. And if you give up now, he wins twice. Jamal closed his eyes, the words piercing through the fog of despair. You told me numbers don't lie, Emily pressed. So prove it again. Not for him. Not even for me. For you. Because you deserve to be seen. Something stirred faintly inside Jamal. Not fire, not yet, but an ember refusing to die. The next day at school, Jamal walked the halls with his head down, ignoring the whispers. But Emily's words echoed in his mind, each repetition pushing back against the despair. During lunch, he sat in the library, flipping through a math journal he had borrowed weeks ago. He traced the equations on the page with his finger, feeling the familiar rhythm return. Numbers still welcomed him, even when people didn't. Emily found him there, sliding into the seat across from him. She didn't speak at first, just watched him, letting the silence settle. Then she said quietly, You're still Jamal Carter. No grade changes that. He looked up at her, his eyes tired but clearer. What if it doesn't matter? What if no one ever believes me? Emily leaned forward. Then we make them. Not by begging. Not by arguing. By showing them something so undeniable they can't erase it. Jamal studied her face, searching for doubt. He found none, That afternoon, as the final bell rang, a man lingered outside the school gate. He was middle-aged, with a notepad in his hand, and a camera slung over his shoulder. A reporter. He had caught wind of the math contest over the weekend. The story of a quiet black student who stunned judges with his solutions had reached his newsroom, tucked between routine updates about sports scores and city council meetings. Curious, he had come to see if the rumors were true. As Jamal exited with his backpack slung low, Emily walking beside him, the reporter stepped forward. "Excuse me," he said, his tone polite, but firm. "You're Jamal Carter, right? The student from the regional math contest?" Jamal froze, startled. Emily's eyes widened. The reporter extended his notepad. "I'd like to hear your story." Jamal's breath caught. For the first time, someone outside the school walls wanted to listen. Not to Callahan, not to the principal, but to him. The reporter introduced himself as Thomas Green, a local journalist known for covering education stories. His voice was calm, his demeanor patient, but his eyes carried a hunger for truth that Jamal hadn't seen in any adult from the school. "Want to hear it from you," Green said, notebook poised. "Not from teachers, not from administrators, from you." Jamal hesitated, his throat tight. He wasn't used to being asked to speak, not about himself, not about his pain. Emily gave him a small nod, urging him forward. Denise, who had arrived just in time to see the exchange, stepped closer, her protective presence grounding him. "He's been silenced long enough," Denise said firmly. "If you want the truth, you'll hear it. But you'll hear it from both of us." Green agreed, and later that evening, they sat around Denise's kitchen table. Jamal's notebooks were stacked in front of him, pages worn from hours of work. Green listened intently as Denise laid out the timeline. The mocking in class, the fabricated grades, the sudden F that didn't match Jamal's ability. She showed him the folder of copied assignments, marked with red ink that turned correct answers into lies. "And then," she added, her voice softening, "he went to the competition. And he proved in front of judges what I've always known. My son isn't failing, he's being failed." Green scribbled furiously, his brow furrowed in disbelief and anger. When he turned to Jamal, his tone was gentler. "And you, Jamal? How does it feel knowing you're right but no one believes you?" Jamal swallowed hard. His voice was low, but steady. "It feels like being invisible. Like you can scream the answer, but all they hear is silence. It feels like you don't belong anywhere. But then, numbers remind me, I do." Green paused, letting the words settle. He didn't interrupt, didn't dismiss. He simply listened. And in that moment, Jamal realized how rare it was to have an adult look at him not as a problem but as a person. 2 days later, the article appeared in the Sunday paper, "Silence Genius: How a Lincoln High Student Exposed Racial Bias in the Classroom." It was more than an article. It was a narrative. Green wove Jamal's story into a tapestry of systemic issues, citing national statistics about black students being undergraded, over-disciplined, and dismissed. He quoted Denise's words about her son's brilliance. He described Jamal's live performance at the regional math competition, his flawless solution silencing the room. And he didn't spare Callahan or Principal Hawkins, naming their roles in perpetuating the injustice. The story hit like a spark in dry grass. Within hours, it spread online. Parents shared it on Facebook with captions like, "This could be any of our children." On Twitter, hashtags emerged: "Justice for Jamal," "Silenced no more," "Math Genius." Strangers commented in outrage, tagging local officials, demanding accountability. "Unbelievable. This is why our kids lose faith in schools. Give that boy a scholarship right now." Denise's phone buzzed, non-stop. Friends, church members, distant relatives calling to say they had read the piece and were proud of Jamal. But not all responses were kind. Some comments dripped with cynicism. "There's always more to the story. Sounds like his mom is playing the race card. If he was really a genius, he wouldn't need excuses." Denise showed Jamal only the supportive ones. But he wasn't naive. He knew the world would always question him more harshly than others. At school, the atmosphere shifted overnight. Some students whispered about him in awe, like he was suddenly a celebrity. Others glared, muttering about special treatment. Emily stood by his side, daring anyone to say something outright. "Let them talk," she whispered. "The world knows now. They can't erase you anymore." But Callahan was far from defeated. In the teacher's lounge, he slammed the paper down on the table. This is slander, he growled. Principal Hawkins frowned, scanning the article. It's problematic. Problematic? Callahan snapped. It's libel. It paints me as a racist. Undermines my entire career. Do you understand what this could do to the school's reputation? Hawkins closed the paper, his jaw tight. We need to control the narrative. Issue a statement. Downplay it as exaggeration. A misunderstanding. If we act quickly, we can minimize the fallout. Callahan smirked, the old arrogance returning. Exactly. Carter and his mother are blowing this out of proportion, and once the outrage dies down, everyone will forget. But they underestimated the storm brewing outside their walls. That week, a group of parents showed up at the school board meeting, holding signs, "Believe our kids," "End classroom bias." Denise stood among them, gripping Jamal's hand. For the first time, she wasn't alone. One mother stood and spoke. My daughter was suspended for talking back, while her white classmate got detention for the same thing. This isn't new, it's just finally being exposed. Another father added, we entrust our children to these schools. But if this is how they're treated, who is the school really serving? The board squirmed under the scrutiny. Hawkins issued a carefully worded statement about ongoing review and ensuring fairness. But his tone was defensive, not apologetic. Jamal sat quietly beside his mother, his face calm but unreadable. Inside, he felt torn, grateful that people were rallying, but terrified of what retaliation might follow. The retaliation came quickly. In class, Callahan never mentioned the article, but his silence was louder than any insult. He ignored Jamal's raised hand, called on everyone else, and when forced to acknowledge him, muttered comments under his breath.
Media darling, he sneered one day, not loud enough for the whole class, but just enough for Jamal to hear.
Jamal's chest tightened, but he stayed silent. Emily leaned closer, whispering, he's unraveling. Don't let him pull you down with him. At home, Denise reassured her son. You've already won more than he ever expected. The community is with you now. But Jamal shook his head. He's still my teacher. He still controls my grades. None of that has changed. Denise wrapped her arm around him, pulling him close. Then we'll change it. One way or another. One evening, while Jamal sat hunched over his desk, working through a set of advanced calculus problems, Denise's phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. Hello? She answered cautiously. Mrs. Carter? The voice was formal, precise. This is Dr. Alan Myers from the mathematics department at State University. I read the article about your son. His story and his talent deeply impressed us. Denise's breath caught. She looked over at Jamal, who was lost in his equations, unaware of the conversation unfolding. Dr. Myers continued. We're hosting a seminar next month, where students present their mathematical work to faculty and graduate scholars. We would be honored if Jamal Carter would attend and share his problem-solving process with us. Denise's eyes filled with tears. You want him to present? Yes. We believe he deserves a platform larger than a high school classroom. This could be the start of something remarkable. When Denise hung up, her hands shook. She turned to Jamal, her voice trembling with both pride and disbelief. Maybe they want you at the university to present your work. Jamal froze, his pencil hovering midair. His eyes widened, and for the first time in weeks, a genuine smile spread across his face. The boy Callahan, tried to silence, was about to step onto a stage bigger than any classroom, one where even his teacher couldn't control the narrative. The university's auditorium gleamed with polished wood and tall windows that poured in afternoon light. Students, professors, and graduate researchers filled the rows, their notebooks open, pens ready, murmurs of anticipation weaving through the air. Jamal stood backstage, gripping his worn notebook in one hand, his palms slick with sweat. He had never been in a room like this before. The ceiling seemed impossibly high, the audience impossibly sharp. These weren't high school students waiting to laugh at him. These were scholars, experts, people who had built their lives around numbers. Beside him, Denise placed a steady hand on his shoulder. Baby, you've been ready for this since the day you picked up a pencil. Don't forget that. Emily leaned in from the other side, her eyes bright. They're going to see what I've always seen. Jamal nodded, though his throat was dry. He thought of Callahan's voice in his head. Kids like you don't belong here. For a moment, doubt clawed at him. But then he looked down at his notebook, the pages filled with neat equations, proofs and ideas that had carried him through the darkest moments. Numbers had never lied to him. He had to trust them now. When his name was announced, Jamal stepped onto the stage. The auditorium quieted. He walked to the whiteboard, the marker in his hand trembling slightly. He began with a theorem, a calculus proof he had been working on late into the nights, refining over and over, until it felt airtight. His voice was quiet at first as he explained his opening steps, but as the equations began to build, something shifted. The numbers took over. His strokes on the board grew surer, his words steadier. The logic unfolded cleanly, each step flowing into the next. The board filled with integrals, substitutions, and simplifications, the problem collapsing beautifully into its solution. A hush settled over the room. Professors leaned forward, eyebrows raised. Graduate students glanced at each other, scribbling notes furiously. Jamal circled his final result, then stepped back, his chest rising and falling quickly. For a moment, silence hung. Then, applause. Strong, sustained, genuine. Encouraged, Jamal launched into a second demonstration. This one a creative application of calculus to a real-world problem, predicting patterns of traffic flow. He explained how he'd adapted standard models to better reflect unpredictable conditions. As he spoke, his eyes lit with something more than confidence. It was passion. The room could feel it. He wasn't just solving equations, he was telling a story through numbers, showing how math lived beyond paper. Emily sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Denise dabbed her eyes with a tissue, her heart swelling as she watched her son step fully into the light. When Jamal concluded, he lowered the marker and turned back to the audience. His hands trembled slightly, but not from fear this time, from release, from the weight of carrying silence for too long. Finally lifted. The applause thundered louder now, echoing against the high ceiling. Afterward, as Jamal stepped off stage, a professor with salt and pepper hair approached him quickly. He extended his hand. "That was extraordinary," the professor said. "I'm Dr. Myers. I've seen graduate students struggle with problems you made look effortless. You have a gift, Jamal, a rare one." Jamal shook his hand, stunned. Dr. Myers continued, his tone earnest. "I'd like to offer you mentorship. We can connect you with resources, advanced coursework, even research opportunities. With the right guidance, you could be publishing by the time you graduate high school." Denise gasped softly, her hand flying to her chest. Emily grinned so widely her cheeks hurt. Jamal blinked, his voice barely above a whisper. You really think I could do that?" Dr. Myers smiled warmly. "I don't think. I know." More professors came, offering congratulations, asking about his methods, curious about his thought process. For the first time, Jamal wasn't defending his intelligence, he was being sought out for it. Denise stood off to the side, tears slipping down her cheeks. All the late nights, all the tears, all the fights, it was worth this moment. Her son was seen, truly seen. Emily leaned close to Jamal. "Told you," she whispered. "Unstoppable." As the seminar wrapped up, the local press who had covered the story earlier arrived. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. "Jamal Carter, how does it feel to present at a university at your age? What message would you give to other students who feel overlooked?" Jamal hesitated at first, but then his voice came steady. "It feels like being heard for the first time. And if there's one thing I'd say, it's that silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes silence is just waiting for the right moment to speak." The cameras caught every word. The applause that followed wasn't just from scholars but from the reporters and community members who had gathered, their pride palpable. But as the story spread, clips from his presentation going viral online, hashtags reigniting the ripple returned to Lincoln High. Parents began questioning why such a gifted student had nearly failed math under Mr. Callahan's watch. Letters poured into the school board. Phone calls jammed the office lines. The community wasn't just outraged now. They were mobilized. One parent confronted Hawkins directly in the parking lot. "You let this happen. You sided with a teacher who tried to bury a child, and you thought no one would notice." Another added, "We trust this school with our kids. If you can't protect them, maybe you shouldn't be principal." Callahan, too, felt the pressure. In the grocery store, whispers followed him down the aisles. At church, families turned their faces away. His confidence cracked under the weight of public scrutiny. The final blow came when parents organized a meeting in the school auditorium. Dozens showed up, many carrying copies of the article or printouts of Jamal's viral presentation. Denise sat in the front row, her back straight, Jamal and Emily by her side. When Callahan entered, the murmurs rose. Some parents glared openly. Others whispered behind their hands. One mother stood and pointed directly at him. "That's the man who tried to fail Jamal Carter. That's the man who told a child he didn't belong." Callahan flushed, opening his mouth to respond, but cameras were already rolling. News crews had arrived, drawn by the growing storm. The lens of accountability had finally turned toward him. As the cameras zoomed in, parents closed in around Callahan, demanding answers. For the first time, he wasn't the one in control of the narrative. The meeting in the school auditorium lasted late into the night. Parents spoke with fire in their voices, their words slicing through the air like blades. Reporters scribbled notes, cameras rolled, and for once the spotlight wasn't on Jamal's silence. It was on the adults who had tried to silence him. Mr. Callahan sat stiffly at the edge of the stage, his jaw clenched, sweat beading along his temple. Every accusation landed like a blow. "You mocked him. You failed him on purpose. You told a black child he didn't belong." Beside him, Principal Hawkins shifted uncomfortably, his polished composure slipping under the weight of scrutiny. For years, his authority had insulated him. But tonight, authority offered no shield. Within a week, the school district announced an official disciplinary review. Callahan was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Hawkins was summoned before the school board, not as a leader, but as a man whose choices had enabled injustice. The news spread quickly. Local headlines declared, "Community demands accountability in Lincoln High bias case. Teacher under fire after attempt to silence black student genius." For the first time, the narrative wasn't whispered in hallways or denied behind office doors. It was loud, it was public, and it couldn't be erased. The day Hawkins finally called Denise into his office, the air was heavy with forced humility. His desk, once a place of authority, now looked small.
"Mrs. Carter," he began, his voice quieter than she had ever heard. "I owe you and Jamal an apology. I failed to protect him. I dismissed your concerns when I should have acted. And I allowed Mr. Callahan's behavior to go unchecked."
Denise listened, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. He continued, "I know words cannot undo the harm that has been done. But I want you to know, changes are being implemented. Mandatory bias training, new oversight for grading practices, a stricter review process for parent complaints." Denise leaned forward, her voice steady and sharp. "It took my son being humiliated, sabotaged and nearly destroyed for you to act. You want forgiveness? Earn it. Don't just fix this for Jamal. Fix it for every child who's been silenced because of the color of their skin." Hawkins lowered his gaze. For once he had no defense. Jamal's path, however, was no longer bound by Lincoln High's narrow walls. A month after the university seminar, an envelope arrived at the Carter apartment. Inside was a letter. "We are pleased to offer Jamal Carter a full scholarship to attend the State University Summer Mathematics Institute, an advanced program for gifted students. We believe Jamal's potential is extraordinary, and we are honored to support his journey." Denise read the letter aloud, her hands trembling. Jamal sat frozen, the words echoing in his ears. Scholarship, gifted, extraordinary. Emily whooped with joy when she heard the news. "I knew it. I told you. They can't stop you, Jamal." For the first time, Jamal allowed himself a full, unguarded smile. Not the cautious, fleeting grin of someone afraid it would be taken away, but a smile rooted in pride. The community celebrated, but also reflected. At church gatherings, in barbershops, in living rooms, people spoke about Jamal's story. "How many of our kids have been written off?" One father asked during a neighborhood meeting. "How many Jamals are out there being told they're lazy when they're brilliant?" A mother added. The story wasn't just about one boy anymore. It had become a mirror, forcing the community to confront the ways bias had stolen futures silently, invisibly, for generations. Denise stood at the center of it, her son beside her, reminding everyone that resilience wasn't just survival, it was resistance. But Jamal himself carried the lesson most deeply. One afternoon, weeks later, he sat alone in the library at Lincoln High. The familiar hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence. A new problem had been written on the whiteboard by another teacher. Complex, intimidating, one that made even advanced students groan. Jamal walked up to the board slowly. He felt the familiar eyes on him. A few students snickered, expecting him to stumble. The old reflex rose in his chest, that urge to shrink, to avoid the spotlight. But then he remembered the applause at the university, the mentorship offer, the scholarship letter. He remembered his mother's voice, Emily's faith, the community's rallying cries. He lifted the marker. Step by step he worked the problem, his strokes deliberate and steady. His breathing slowed as the equations fell into place. The room grew quiet, the snickers fading into silence. At the final step he circled the solution. He set the marker down and stepped back. This time, the room didn't laugh. It didn't scoff. It watched. It listened. Jamal turned, his eyes sweeping the room. For the first time in his life at Lincoln High, he felt what had always been his respect. That night, at the kitchen table, Denise asked gently, "How did it feel?" Jamal thought for a moment, then answered with a small smile. "Like solving the same problem twice, except the first time, nobody believed me, and the second time the world finally listened." Denise reached across the table, gripping his hand tightly. "And that, baby, is justice." Jamal flipped open his notebook, eyes sparkling with curiosity, as he began scribbling a new equation. Another impossible problem waited. But now, he knew, he wasn't solving it in silence anymore. The world was watching. Jamal's story is not just his. It's the story of every child who's been silenced, doubted, or pushed aside. If you believe every voice deserves to be heard, type yes in the comments. And if this broke your heart, subscribe so more people never forget stories like this.